Hello, everyone. I logged in just a few minutes early, so we'll see everybody join in a few moments, I think.
Hello, hello.
Hello, sir. I haven't interacted with you for several minutes.
I know, right?
so, I normally let you carry forth on this call, but so many of the things I'm doing are involving vulnerability disclosure that I figured I need to be on this gathering too. So,
Love it.
we don't
No,
I think as far as the presentation for Vancouver, I'm sure it can be improved, but at this point, I think we have something that actually is worth sharing. So I
okay.
sent you my proposal for how we could hand off stuff. I don't know
Sure.
if you think that's
I have not
reasonable.
had a chance to look at it. I've got a little bit of time before I have to pick my kid up tomorrow. So I'll
Okay.
take a look and let you know.
My basic theory is you start with the intro. When it goes to the best practices, I'll talk about badge. I'll talk about that. Then I hand it over to you to talk about scorecards and wrap it up. So I'll be the crunchy center of the sandwich, and you can be the bread on the outside.
Yum. Good. That means
Something like.
I need to finish. I got a vulnerability one I'm doing with Madison, and then I've got the mobilization plan one.
Okay. Yeah, and
Then I'm done.
I probably should put some feedback out on the scorecards because some of the stuff isn't as obvious on their website. So probably need to.
Patches are always welcome.
Absolutely, in my copious free time.
Thank
Yeah, so, but I was hoping to get some other things done today, but I thought getting those slides done is important. I mean, it's
you.
coming
No,
up
no, I
soon.
appreciate it. And next week will be fast because I'm actually picking my kid up again because he's done with his first year of college. So I'll be out for part of a day driving around and loading up the truck.
All right, congrats.
Thanks.
Yeah, my middle child is almost done with her college, and then I got two to go.
Hello, folks. We'll just give it a few moments to see if other friends join. There she
Welcome.
is.
Hi, friends.
Hello,
Hey.
friend.
I was promised connections with Australians, so I'm here.
Right. Right. We have historically had Oliver and Andrew. So we'll see how that goes with us.
Yeah, I'm just purely kidding.
If any Australian will do, we can probably find someone from down under.
That's one of the things I miss most about Red Hat was a large part of the security team was in Australia. So I didn't like the
Ah,
hours, but I loved interacting with the folks down there. Just good friends, good, very sharp folks.
and they are welcome anytime.
And they're always very honest and direct, unlike other parts of the world. So that was like refreshing. You always knew where you stood with them because they would tell you to go F yourself if they weren't happy with what you were telling them.
I will say significant parts of the tech community, I think, move much more towards the direct because I think in part because I mean with computer software you can't you can't hint and suggest either there's a patch or there isn't. The advantage of physical things and software is that it doesn't matter how much you hint, you actually have to do a change.
I dropped a link to our agenda. We'll just give it another couple minutes. If anybody has any items they'd like to discuss, Mr. Wheeler has some things he wants to talk about. And we will get rolling in just a minute.
Yeah, is Jonathan on? I was expecting him to be on. I don't see him yet.
He's always around. I'm surprised he was here. He was here in this meeting last time.
Okay.
I was supposed to have a sync with Oliver on Tuesday earlier this week that he canceled because he's not feeling well. So
maybe he's
could
not.
happen again.
We'll do our best. I personally don't have a lot of information about OSB to share any new updates. We're writing a blog.
Now, is anybody going to be talking about the inbound? I mean, we've got this thing on the outbound vulnerability disclosure. I thought there's a group working on the inbound, or is that not really considered part of this group?
It is. So that was, I believe, Luigi's proposal, where he has kind of the creating a security MD and having that inbound policy for all. Noah, we're getting a lot of wind noise. If you might be able to mute for us for a moment, that would be groovy. Thank you, sir. But yeah, he has that, and the idea. I guess once we get the words done, we probably should route that up to the TAC to maybe get that fast track to see if we're interested in having that. All right. Well, I apologize to Madison. I have very few friends from Australia to share today. But we'll get started. Do we all know each other here? I think so.
Don't know if I've met Noah yet, but
yeah, I don't know if I
met
know
everyone
all
else.
either.
Noah, would you like to introduce yourself? This is the group.
Sure. Sorry, it's a bit windy. I'm trying to relocate.
Okay.
I'm a security researcher. I work at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I'm also a postgraduate researcher at the Open University in the UK. And my research focuses on security and maintainability, specifically how developers are going to respond to vulnerability disclosures in large open source Go projects.
Oh, you and Jonathan must have talked a lot before.
Yeah,
then.
we actually did meet last week, didn't we?
Yes.
Well, great. Welcome. We love folks that have any kind of interest in vulnerabilities here. Researchers, vendors, maintainers, all stripes. Just to give you a few brief updates, the OSS CERT SIG is still waiting for governing board review. We were supposed to talk about it last week at the GB governance call, but that call was canceled, just lack of quorum. So ideally, we'll talk about it next Thursday to see if we can get kind of a more formal review of the mobilization plan rewrites. I did work with Amanda from the Linux Foundation, and we submitted the CERT for funding consideration by the Tech Sovereign Fund. So that's another avenue to potentially provide some resources to that effort. And I know our friends here in the States at CISA were quite interested when I described the initiative to them. So we'll see how that progresses within the foundation and what kind of, if we get any feedback or participation. Any questions about the CERT? CVD guide for consumers. I'm still soliciting contributors to start that effort. I started an outline, and it's linked through that issue, and then there's a document. If anyone's interested in contributing and collaborating on that, once I get somebody else, a couple somebody else's, hopefully, we can start writing that guide, and that would be our third guide. Josh.
Can I ask the dumb question?
No, no such thing as a dumb question. Just dumb crow.
What does CVD stand for?
Coordinated vulnerability disclosure.
Makes sense. Gotcha.
Yeah, you're very no problem at all. And if you attend the Open Source North America Summit, Madison and I have a slide that talks about the whole presentation is about CVD, but we have that term defined in the presentation.
Very explicitly.
Nice.
All right, Jonathan, you want to do a quick update on AutoFix SIG? Which one more meeting and you're officially a SIG.
I thought that was. Didn't we do? You said 2 meetings, and it's been 2 meetings since the 2 meeting. No, it was 5.
3? I thought it was 5. I'll look it up. You guys
I
were.
thought you said 3. Yeah,
I think it's 5, but I'll double check. But
I think we're good
in.
at this point, but whatever. Great, perfect. So there was a meeting yesterday, for the AutoFix SIG, and the discussion revolved around the header of the document regarding my brain. Let me see if I can date up. I created a lucid chart. Skip. Yeah, I can. Hang on. No, wrong. Here we go. Okay. Specification, screen share. So there's been a lot of discussion about the private disclosure requirements here and how we are requiring people to do disclosure of vulnerabilities. And so this is the flow that I wrote or put into a thing yesterday after the meeting. At a high level, it encapsulates this idea that, so Madison, you'll enjoy this. I've come up with a new term for private vulnerability reporting. It's and it's supposed to be generic enough to be not applicable to any platform. It's what is it? We use the term PMPVR. It's pragmatic means of private vulnerability reporting. So if the repository host supports PMPVR, which is GitHub's the only one that does, then yes. Then if the issues are enabled, then you create an issue. If they don't have PMPVR enabled, you request that they enable it. You wait up to 35 days. If they've enabled at that point, then you go through this step and you report their vulnerability by PMPVR. If the repository has it enabled, we go this way, yada, yada, yada. Otherwise, Michael Scovetta has written this Python script that attempts to look at a repository, or you give it a Perl and it says, here's the most likely way to disclose. And it gives you like percentages of like 80% this way, like 10% this way,
Confidence.
like try, yeah. And if that works, then if you get a result, then you, oh my God, it's spam. You send an email with the patch. If the emails all bounce, you just open a pull request. Otherwise, you wait 90 days. If it's fixed, fin. But if you can't find an email or all the emails bounce, you create a public pull request. That's the current high-level proposal. You got a hand up there.
I do, because I do a substantial amount of diagramming. I'm going to be a pedantic jerk. This diagram confuses me. I don't know where it starts. There's no beginning chiclet. You have an end. I don't see a beginning.
What of these icons is the start?
You see the little fix, little oval-y thing?
This one?
Yeah, you put that at the beginning and the end of your workflow.
And often have the word begin.
Yeah. Or start, yeah. I have spoken.
There we go.
Okay. So
okay.
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah.
I mean, quick comment. I mean, PvP. You could.
Oh, it's so much clearer now. Now I understand.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say private reporting, by the way. And I was confused by your comment that only GitHub supports that. I mean, GitLab's had this for years. If you can just create an issue and mark it confidential, problem solved. So It's GitHub that's the recent addition to the
Oh,
party.
is it? Okay, so this is okay, then interesting. I didn't.
And
Do they
Yeah, they've
support-
had it. This has been the long-term complaint is why don't you do it like everybody else does?
Interesting.
Bugzilla does too.
Yeah.
Do they
Mozilla-
support private pull requests?
Now that well, they call them merge. Everyone pull requests means GitHub. Everybody else calls them merge requests. So now that I don't know offhand. I think they do, but I'd have to go check.
This is intended for automated pull request generation, and GitHub is supporting the ability to automatically create a pull request. I don't know if we want to just open a patch file or submit a patch. I guess that's better than nothing. Is there an I guess if there's an API for it and it's better than nothing, then maybe it's sufficient.
Yeah, I guess when you said a report, I assume it's just a, hey, I have found a vulnerability, not, and here is the thing to merge.
No. So the autofix SIG is focused on not spamming maintainers with like.
Okay. I'm sorry. This is
Yeah.
all the automated vulnerability.
Yeah, this is all about automated fixing of vulnerabilities.
God, I'm sorry. I missed.
No, but I mean if they do support opening private issues,
Yeah.
Submitting a patch file in a private issue is half the story. It's not fully the story, but it's like I don't know. And you've been in a meeting, Josh. What do you think?
I'm not sure that they support a private merge. It's a private issue. I would have to go research this. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's knowledge that I didn't have, so I can bring that to the autofix SIG meeting.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you can do is say, hey, in the at least a hey, you've got an issue.
Yeah, right. Crow, you got your hand back up.
Right. Fun fact: the other folks, the other Git folks, GitLab, are members of the foundation. So somebody somewhere should have some contact information that you could we could try to track that down, and you could directly ask them if they have that capability.
Okay, there is an ability to create a confidential merge request in GitLab. Sorry, I'm just doing the quick research this instant. I don't know what the
Google Wheeler.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly. I know how to invoke Google. Aren't you impressed? So I'm going to paste right here. In fact, why don't I just post
can
it in
anybody
notes too?
contribute those, or is that only
That I don't know. I'm gonna have to actually. I mean, it looks like it will tell me, but I'll actually have to like sit and read, which is beyond my Google flu. I actually have to read something. But it looks like there's information available. If we sat down, we could answer that question.
Well, that's interesting.
So how's this? Let me put that there. I at the very least, I think we ought to look at it, to look at Google Labs. And and satisfy ourselves what the answer is. I don't know what the answer is, but I think that should be a 15-minute research review. Maybe talk to some folks. And there is the additional complication that when you say GitHub, most of the times people mean the public repo, whereas GitLab, there's the public enterprise instance, and there's also the mini, GitLab is often deployed by particular projects separately, and they can configure them in different ways. So that's not a bad thing. It just means that when you say, does GitLab support it? Sometimes the software supports it, but whether or not it's enabled or not will depend on the project.
Right. Okay. And just to answer the earlier question you asked, why is it PM PBR? Because it's a pragmatic means of because this is all through automation, right? So it's yeah, and up until today, GitHub has supported private forks, but not an automated way to create private forks. So yes, this is interesting. I learned something new today. Thank you, David Wheeler.
Right.
I will bring that will be a topic point for the working group meeting. I'm also going to be probably increasing the frequency of those meetings from bi-weekly to just weekly. Because I just need to message Keel to do that. The other thing, do you want me to go into the other thing, Crow, or do you have a thing?
Sure.
Okay,
I we're doing your SIG recap, so
Perfect.
it's yours.
This actually, David, you're in a call that I actually want to bring this to you. Okay. This is the proposed. I think most of you guys read the message I sent into the Slack channel, and if you didn't, and then I had a chat with Mike Dolan, and we basically took this document that I'd originally written with the working group, and we heavily modified it to make it two documents. The first document is, hey, the Open Source Security Foundation is adopting a policy for outgoing vulnerability reports. And then the other document is, here's the policy, anybody can use it. So we're basically creating a vulnerability reporting or outbound vulnerability reporting policy that anybody with any named organization can choose to adopt. So any research group, anybody, that is this one down here, the model outbound vulnerability disclosure policy. Yes. Okay, cool. So we had some comments from David. David, you wanted to switch Will to May?
Okay, I made several comments, most of which looks like you just accepted. I mean, for the most part, they were just attempts to clarify. You're talking about the 0-day one and the 7 days notice?
Yes, this at most was actually suggested that we add for clarity by Mike Dolan.
Really? Okay. All right. So I don't know exactly what Mike, what Mike's thoughts were on the subject. We haven't talked about this. Here's my concern. I don't mind in general saying normally it would be 7 days. I'm a little afraid of making it always 7 days, no matter what. It is true that if it's already being exploited, that is bad. But I guess what I'm going in is there's an interesting paper, I think it was by Crispin Cohen years back, which talked about the trade-offs. I thought was actually very interesting. He viewed it as a calculus problem where you're integrating over time. So basically, if you think of exploitations as the y-axis and time as the x-axis, what you're trying to do is you're integrating for all the exploitations. You're trying to minimize the harm over time. So basically, you're trying to set the release times of various things to minimize total harm, and you can do that in several ways. Typically, obviously, if a user has no idea that there's a problem, they're unlikely to do anything about it. However, if you say that there's a problem, but you don't give them much to go on, like and install this update, it doesn't help them very much. What's more, we have had way too many experiences where developers rush a patch, and the result is frankly worse because it doesn't solve the problem, but people think it solves the problem, and there's only so much time in the day to install another patch. And so all too often what happens is the patch is bad, people install the patch, they think it's fixed, or the fix introduces new vulnerabilities. Yes, that is also true.
Right.
I mean, that's why you just issue. I mean, sadly, you just issue another CV. Like that's what happened with.
Okay. Issuing a new CVE is absolutely disconnected with, and I fixed it, because if you issue a new CVE for the same component, it is unlikely for the new one to get fixed by a lot of folks. The problem is that you have already shot your shot. They will come in later.
Really?
Maybe.
I mean, that's we saw that with Log4Shell. Was like the first vulnerability was, hey, this is like vulnerable. You got to fix this, and then they're like, wait, that's not sufficient. We're going to disable the feature entirely.
And think about this from the customer perspective. Every time there's a warning or an advisory, they have research to do. And then every
Right.
time there's a patch, they have to pause operations and test and then roll that out. So if you're doing that multiple times in a row, they're going to be forced with multiple outages. And then, like, let's say this affects like a hyperscaler like Google or AWS. They or Azure, they dislike rebooting. So depending on, if you've got all these things chained together, they'd like a complete fix and have to do the work once, as opposed to if something's rushed, they have to do it again. It's displeasing.
Right. And I'm not saying that sadly, people make mistakes. That's why we have vulnerabilities. And sadly, sometimes the fixes will have mistakes. But pressuring people to do them in a rush job increases the odds of a bad fix. And in addition, so that's the problem from the fixing side. There's also the problem from the attack side. It's true, as soon as there's an announcement to users, they can start to take some steps, like maybe turn off the computers. But the problem is, the thing is, just because something is being attacked and is therefore being exploited and therefore is a 0-day, that doesn't mean all the attackers know. So as soon as you announce to the world, it means that all the attackers know. And if all the attackers know, but there's very little the defenders can do that's successful, you're making it worse. So my pitch is, yes, clearly you need to have a far more accelerated time frame. I'm even okay with 7 days as the default. I just don't want to have a policy that says it must be 7 days. I would prefer 7 days, but convince us otherwise. I'll say kernel patches, for example. It doesn't matter if the Linux kernel folks release it within an hour. It takes a long time to get that out through the distros, and just think of the effort it takes to update your smartphone.
I mean, that's if you look at Google's Project Zero's policy and their FAQ, they consider the vulnerability disclosed as soon as it hits a public source branch. And so they would go fully public with a vulnerability as soon as it hits public.
Okay, but is that how you're measuring it?
No, I'm Google Project Zero's FAQ states that if they see code hit public branch, they consider that a disclosure.
Yeah, but that's not what you're
No, I'm not saying that here. I'm saying that's what they do.
Sure.
I'm not stating that here. Right.
Right. But the text here says when there's an observed software under exploitation anywhere in the world, suddenly there's no more than 7 days ever.
Correct.
And I think that's okay as a default. I mean, I think it's a little short, but I mean, I totally get it. You need a number.
We have this clause down here. Do you not see that as sufficient to handle your case?
No, I do not see that sufficient, because it really says it will be 7 days, period.
That is the intention. Yes, there's intent. The intention is for there to be no confusion.
Yeah, but they can.
Crow.
Two things. I endorse the alteration from will to may. It gives you more flexibility. You may always select that it's 7 days, but you might not. And then you point to GPZ. GPZ they have a methodology. It is controversial amongst many within the industry. It's a way to do it. They seem very happy with it, but it is not necessarily the best way. It's a way.
Yeah. So the problem is the bottom one just says, "Hey, extreme cases," but I think in the case of a 0 day, there's an additional construct that doesn't apply to the others. As soon as you have active exploitation, you now have a race. It's not just a race for discovery. It's a race. Damage is occurring. And so now you're trading off the damage occurring versus the, telling out to the world.
Well,
so I think
you
the
have to weigh
different
in what
trade
the
requires
impact
additional
is.
text. I'm sorry?
You have to weigh in also what the impact is. If this is
Right.
just a denial of service and the service falls over and then automatically restarts, Yeah, it's annoying, but is this something that affects the safety and life? That's a different impact. And again, that's why I prefer the flexibility of May. And you could always select that.
Yeah.
But at least with the May, that gives you the chance to weigh other mitigating factors.
Yeah. So what I'm proposing is basically saying normally within 7 days, and then it says this, and then adding text that says this publication time for 0 days may be longer than 7 days if we independently determine that a longer time is much more likely to be less harmful overall to all users of that software. And that's a lengthy sentence. We can probably shorten it down, but basically giving the idea of why would you choose more, and it's because you're trying to weigh the damage to all users.
Yeah. And maybe if you always had a treatment or a mitigation to work around the problem, that might be acceptable to always,
I mean,
break the glass
that
and
is the
go faster.
expectation, is that the 7 days, if the developer that is developing the fix does not believe that they can get a fix out in 7 days, which is totally feasible, this deadline at least gives them a deadline by which they need to have mitigating factors communicated to the wider public.
Yeah, but the thing is, that assumes there are mitigations. There are a lot of vulnerabilities. The only mitigation is stop using computers, go back to a cave.
That the answer is shut it off is not a bad answer, right? Like
No. For heart monitors, it is not an acceptable answer.
You're right about that, and I know how long it took for some of those heart monitors or penicillin makers to finally recall their software. Like I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, I know you are. So we're actually, I don't think we're not arguing so much the facts as the what do we do with the facts. And my pitch is, sure, tell everybody normally 7 days. I think that's really short, but I guess I can live with that. But I don't think that we want to mandate it's always 7 days, because frankly, I think in many cases people will be unable to make a fix within that time frame, and they will be unable to have a useful mitigation in that timeline. And I understand, hey, shut it off, but for a lot of users, that's not really an acceptable mitigation.
Are you stating that from the perspective of an open source maintainer won't be able to come up with a mitigation in that period of time? Or are you saying that the industry writ large can't come up with a mitigation in that period of time?
Yes.
I think anyone, any organization, or open source or not, it doesn't matter.
That is
If it's a buffer overflow and you can't fix it in 7 days, what the heck's wrong with you? Of course, there are, but of course, if you're European, you may be on your 2-week vacation.
Yeah.
And there is no contacting you. But the problem is, not all attacks are buffer overflows. I mean, Meltdown and Spectre, we're still working on it. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that. Sorry, Crow.
No.
My legal team has advised me I am not allowed to say those words.
Okay, but I'm allowed to. But in all
Scroll down
seriousness,
to page 2.
Oh,
it's actually Mike Dolan suggested we put.
Where are we here?
Just scroll down to where it's highlighted, or look at my screen.
New class of vulnerabilities.
As always, we reserve the right to bring the publication date forward or backwards based upon extreme circumstances. Example: the maintainers live in a country hit by an earthquake, or a new class of vulnerabilities being reported, as in Spectre and Meltdown.
Okay, so I mean, you've at least mentioned those, but there are other kinds of vulnerabilities which are really challenging.
Right. They're examples, right? They're not right. I respect where you're coming from, and I also don't want to make the ODA's part overly pedantic, and like you want to be clear in these policies. You want to be clear, and to the other aspect of the 7-day thing is the reason that the 7 days exists, not only from the perspective of getting the information disclosed to maintainers, but it sets a standard for the industry that is vulnerabilities being exploited in the wild are bad. And we as an industry need to be able to react to these things quickly
Mhm.
right? Like we can't this information, if we have evidence of it being exploited in the wild, and usually if we have evidence of being exploited in the wild, it will be because the systems that we are running are the systems being exploited, right? And so that means that we have been impacted by this vulnerability.
Well, not necessarily. It just means you know about it.
Well,
And
but
you're
so
reporting it.
how do you get the visibility into knowing that a vulnerability is being actively exploited? Is because you have some sort of monitoring, or you've been told about it, but that person that was told about it has found out, usually because they have some sort of monitoring. So they are actually being actively exploited by that attack.
No, no, there's many, there are many, I'm sorry, go ahead, Noah. Sorry.
Oh, I work with the founders of Last Line and other such companies, and there's lots of monitoring where they will know about attacks. I just wanted to raise that. It's not always because you're attacked, but there are many network probes out there transparently monitoring.
What, like,
That's it.
what are they called? Honeypots, sort of?
Well, yeah, I mean that's kind of some of the recent work I've done is in honeypots, but also just transparent monitoring. You know, physical network taps
Right.
at various places and
And
Cloudflare.
the other thing, Probe, you're saying, or sorry, not Probe, the other thing you're saying, David, is attackers don't give up their methodologies. The problem that exists in that understanding is you may get visibility into the attacker that is attacking you, but you have no idea, you don't have visibility into the entire internet. You can't know how widely that vulnerability is actively being used. You only have the the snapshot that you have, right? And so how can you reasonably make a determination as to whether or not this is being widely exploited or is not being widely exploited based upon limited knowledge?
Yeah, there are actually companies which specialize in that. They monitor
But
the
we
chatter.
are not that.
No, we can't ask them, however. There's nothing that prevents us from saying, okay, we see this. How much do you see this chattered widely, or is this a specialized attack? Generally, these folks can't share what they the stuff they see, at least not without big bucks. I would be unsurprised if they could at least share, okay, I see this. Do you also see this? Which is a very different kind of question. You're not asking them to reveal anything that they know privately other than just widespreadness. But anyway, but my fundamental point, Jonathan, is really a simple change. Don't make it must. Make it, typically or normal or should, but make it clear there's an out. That's all. Make it clear that it can be more than 7 days, even though that's not the norm, and why you might do long, and the rationale for choosing one against the other. And then if it turns out that in practice you never do more than 7 days, that's fine. But at least give yourself the out, because policies that are over constrained tend to be more of a problem than a solution. Right. I don't want the policy to be the problem.
When I spoke to Mike Dolan, he was his reaction was, wait, why are you waiting at least 7 days? Like, you should be moving faster than that. Right? Like, if it's actively exploited, his reaction was, this should be moving faster than that. Like, you should be making it an upper limit. And I was like, that is an upper limit. He's like, okay, make that clearer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm actually good with both. Make that a maximum, and typically a maximum. Where this is publicly known. Normally to within. Oh, it already says that within at most 7 days. I'm just saying normally you would want it fast, but the problem is you're doing 2 races, and at least in my experience, it is obviously true that sometimes an attacker finds an attack and they tell everybody else, and suddenly everybody else is getting attacked. But in a number of other cases, we get information where it's only been done once. The attackers are trying to hide that. They may not use it again till next month. Well, let's give them, let's make sure that the fix is the right fix then.
Madison, you have been doing disclosure for longer than I have, and you actually have seen these things that are big and beefy and the small and spicy. Can you speak to your experience in a way that doesn't, break any contracts you've already agreed to for NDAs? I don't know.
While I can do that, Krob has his hand up, so I'll let him go.
Oh, sorry. Go Crow.
Go ahead, Madison.
So let's see, I had tabbed away for work. We are still talking about timelines for disclosure, right?
But for
We are
0
focused
days.
predominantly on, this is an actively exploited 0 day, and the discussion is, if we discover that a vulnerability is under active exploitation, basically it's a 0 day, do we make the 7 day deadline a hard upper limit or a soft upper limit for how long before we are required to make the details of the vulnerability public as the reporter?
I would look at it from like a benefit standpoint. At that point, who is it that you're trying to help, which is end users, right? So from a safety perspective, like in my opinion, we should just safely assume that attackers already have this information, right? All of the attackers have this because that is the safest starting point for us to go from, right? So the only people who don't have this information are the users, and are the ones who are being disserviced, right? Is the way that I think about it, at least. So if it's actively being exploited, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just say my experience is colored by places where, in particular, I used to work with the U.S. military, and there are absolutely attacks which which are no public or which are known and then being exploited, but are not known by most attackers. And in fact, I would say that we are moving increasingly to this world because we've now got a huge number. I mean, NSO Group is just one now of a large number of commercial organizations. Their job is to grab exploits and not, and very much working very hard to not get those revealed to anyone else, including any other attacker, because their commercial advantage is being able to attack journalists and other ne'er-do-wells computer systems. Oh, that's probably not what they want to say. But basically, they very much collect the attacks, but are not going to share them with other attackers. So I think that's a nuance. Sometimes lots or all the attackers know, but sometimes there's only one attacker who knows, and they're only limiting, and they're very much limiting where those attacks go because they're trying to keep it a secret.
Right, and so you're saying that because of the attacks that you've mostly seen have been coming from nation states, right?
Well, nation states or organizations hired by nation states.
Yeah, right, exactly. Very well funded. They're hiding these things. So assuming you can do attribution, you can assume that exploit is not being widely used. But
no, it's much simpler. If you only see it once and you never see it anywhere else, even in places where you would expect to see it, it's probably hidden. You can detect some of this simply by usage patterns. If it's rare, even in places you would expect it, it's probably not widely known yet. I'm sorry.
So my perspective was also intended to be like from a theoretical standpoint, right? Like that is my foundation from where I would start thinking about it. Obviously, by no means do all attackers actually have everything, and like I fully am cognizant of government and military limitations from my past life too. Very much so. So yeah, I like to operate from an assumption that, if this is being exploited, the attackers who are likely to exploit this, at least, or the ones who care enough, likely have this information or could be sharing it amongst themselves, right? So who do I want to help? The users. So sharing this now or later, what is the impact for them is typically how I think about it, at least. So I am in favor of flexibility personally, because there are so many different circumstances
So,
to
okay,
account for, that the
What-
flexibility lets you do that.
right. What if we leave this policy, the O-Day policy as is, and amend the publication date based upon extreme circumstances to include a call out for highly targeted attacks? Like the detection is that the O-Day is being exploited in a highly targeted attack. Does that satisfy the constraints of like the only carve out?
Yeah, I think it's much simpler just to say the publication time. I mean, otherwise, now we're defining terms in a way that really doesn't make sense. I would rather publication time is the publication time, or date. Publication date's the publication date. The what are you calling the other one? The report
We
date?
are redefining the publication date to be 7 days here.
Right, but no, but I'm saying, but in this case, if it's more longer than the publication date, would be later. That is, instead of trying to make the publication date a very strange definition, just say, hey, in rare cases, the publication dates could be later.
This seems so hard to verify. Like impractically so. Like how do you prove a negative, right? You can't prove a negative. You can't prove that people don't know a thing.
Well, very few attack. All right, instead of knowing about, maybe it's because the vulnerability is rarely being exploited.
Again, okay. Keep in mind that this is intended to be a policy that anybody can implement that may or may not have the resources and connections to the Open Source Security Foundation.
Then you're going to have to make the assumption that's getting widely exploited.
Right. So
but I don't know why you're assuming that we can't get that data. I mean, that data exists.
No, we can't. But this policy is intended to be applicable and consumable by anyone. So this is intended to be not just an Open Source Security Foundation policy, but anyone can use this policy.
Okay. Statement still stands. Sometimes you have the data, sometimes you don't. If you have the data, then you should use it. If you don't have the data, well, you're going to have to make your best estimate based on what information you do have. But I wouldn't assume you never have this data. That seems like a stretch the other way. There you go. If you're able to, here we go. Oh, you're doing legal nouns, huh? Okay.
That's Dolan, yeah.
Okay. Yep. Welcome to German.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with this, with what I'm referring to.
No.
In German, nouns in general are initial capped, whereas English switched, but the legal profession kept the old German's convention.
Interesting.
We have 14 minutes till the top of the hour.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry but I think this is an important thing, and this was the one argument that we're.
Can we can this top one?
Which top one?
Of the previously publicly.
You don't care about previously, you just care about publicly unknown, right?
No, it's previously unknown. It's like it's not known previously. Like they weren't known about, now it's known.
Well, it's obviously known by somebody. You don't know how many people know about it. It's the public unknown that matters, right?
Not necessarily. It could be previously unknown, but not public, right? It could be going around a bunch of it could be going around in a bunch of internal hacker conversations, like Slack channels. That's not necessarily public, but it is definitely being highly discussed.
Sounds like you're really talking about when we observe a previously unknown to the pub and unknown to the public or something like that. I mean, you've got both of those adjectives are relevant, right?
I mean, I'm just okay. The original wording from the Google policy is when we observe a previously unknown and unpatched vulnerability in a software under active exploitation.
Andrew has his hand raised.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, sorry, I got my camera off because I had a unfortunate altercation with a laser wielding dermatologist yesterday. Sorry, look hideous. So are we differentiating here between a vulnerability without a fix or
Yes.
mitigation, right?
Yes.
So, you know, we talked about who are we trying to serve here by disclosing, and, you know, are we serving the defenders? What can the defenders do about this if there are no mitigations and there are no patches? You're going to have an initial spike where even more bad people know about the vulnerability, therefore are more likely to exploit it. So are you actually helping the defenders by drawing more attention to it until there is some sort of patch or mitigation?
Yeah, according to Google's rationale for, I mean, I can send you their FAQ, which I highly recommend reading. They argue yes.
Yeah, and I argue sometimes because
Same.
it depends on what the mitigation is. I do agree. Actually, it's quite legitimate that the mitigation may be turn off your computer until it's time. But for many systems, that's not really a practical mitigation. And then that comes back to my argument once again with, I got it. Accelerated timeframes are often good.
Can I just quote from their thing just real quickly? Okay. It does, so their question, the question they're answering is, doesn't disclosing a vulnerability when there's no fix endanger users? The answer is counterintuitive at first. Disclosing a small number of unfixed vulnerabilities doesn't meaningfully increase or decrease attackers' capability. Our deadline-based disclosures have a neutral short-term effect on attacker capability. We certainly know there are groups of individuals that are waiting to use public attacks to harm users, like exploit kit authors. We also know that the cost of turning a typical Project Zero vulnerability report into a practical real-world attack is non-trivial. Since Project Zero typically discloses only one part of the exploit chain, attackers need to perform substantial additional research and development to complete the exploit and make it reliable. Any attacker with the resources and technical skills to turn a bug report into a reliable exploit chain would usually be able to build a similar exploit chain, even if we'd never disclosed the bug. They would either have the ability to find and exploit their own ODA vulnerabilities or have access to a range of other interchangeable bugs, e.g. other unfixed, undisclosed bugs from the past weeks or months. Also, the window of exposure between disclosure and a fix being released is very small, i.e. a patch usually arrives short-term after the disclosure is missed. If the attacker's risk of detection the attacker's risk of a detection increases rapidly from the point of disclosure. For any attackers that are willing to exploit publicly disclosed bugs, despite the increased risk of or failure of detection, there currently seems to be two alternative options that are preferred for their cost effectiveness. One, wait for disclosed bugs that require only a small amount of additional research and development, design flaws and or logic bugs or other easily exploitable conditions. Or two, waiting for a fully developed and reliable exploit to be leaked, typically when a targeted exploit attempt using an ODA is detected. All of this means that there is a substantial difference between deadline enforcement disclosures or our normal post-patch disclosure in terms of the observed rates of opportunistic reuse by attackers. If most bugs are fixed in a reasonable time frame, i.e. less than 90 days, then we are only enforcing the deadline on a very small number of unfixed cases. If disclosing a handful of unfixed vulnerabilities doesn't substantially help the attackers in the short term, but it does lead to a demonstrated long-term benefit of shortening patch timelines and more frequent patching cycles, then it would follow that a deadline-based disclosure policy is good for the overall security. So at a high level, they are arguing that having a disclosure policy like this where you have some vulnerabilities going over the deadline, those that miss that deadline set a precedent in the industry that is a forcing function to encourage others in the future to handle these vulnerabilities within the time frame that you have established in policy.
So really quick, to add from the developer perspective on this, knowing about a 0-day, even if there isn't a fix available, does give you more options. So whether that's ripping out the dependency that you're using or turning off the service, like that won't be applicable for every scenario, but it can still be really helpful, even if there is no fix available.
David?
Yeah, and I mean, the overall fact text is fine, but I don't think the argument works as well for the 0 days. At least again, for a straight shot, you know, it must never be beyond that. I still think there are cases where you're going to want to give people more time, even if that's not the normal case.
Noah.
I'd like to not disagree with David. I also wanted to agree with Josh that I think also from a developer perspective, it's a bit of a culture shift that you're like, and also as a parent, when I enforce rules, the children are aware these rules will be enforced. We better change our behavior. And I think it's the culture shift to get the developer community in general to respond more seriously to vulnerability disclosures.
By the way, don't feel it's perfectly reasonable to disagree with me. I will sometimes disagree with me.
We disagree all the time.
We disagree all the time. Krob and
We're
I
still
are,
friends.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is,
this is a great community for discussion, and I really thoroughly enjoy all these digital meetings.
I'm glad. Yeah, please. In fact, I think in general, we're not disagreeing about the facts here. We're disagreeing about a strategy that will best reduce the harm done to users. That's the real goal. And in these and these are challenging situations. My argument is because it's complex and challenging, that it would be important to have an option for longer. Now, as far as taking them seriously, I'm sorry, you can take vulnerabilities very, very seriously and be unable to produce any meaningful fix in 7 days. Even if I exclusively did that and nothing else, there are, if it's a design change to a system, I may not be able to do it in a week. And the reality is that most of the times when somebody gives me a surprise job, I have other work and obligations I'm committed to. I can't do it full time. Other organizations have the same problem. 30 employees and they're all busy. Oh, sorry, Crow, is that you?
No, I'll give you a for example. Since we like talking about the melty ghost so much, that was an incredibly complex problem. And back at the time, I worked at a fashionable hat company, and the scope of the software we had to support was about 12 years. So we had to go back in time to do things. And we had a substantial amount of enterprise customers that ran the global economy on very old software that Linus and Greg and crew were not supporting. And when came time to help develop fixes for the Melty Ghost, we actually had to call people out of retirement because parts of the kernel back in the day were written in assembly and no one had that skill set. So it took a substantial amount of time. And then for those developers that wrote the code like 10 years ago, for them to remember what the hell happened and unlearn 10 years of more modern software development. So it took a while to unwind. So there are some problems sometimes that are very complex and people are legitimately working on it. And again, that's why I advocate for the use of the word may instead of will, because there's always going to be corner cases. There's always going to be very tricky things that require additional, firefighters to hop in. And it requires time.
flexibility.
Right.
Right.
Right. And
It's like what I'm not because I'm old and brittle.
And notice that neither Crow or I saying that, hey, please change the 7 to 30 or 45.
Yeah, no. Okay, so all right, so let's revert it. Okay, so if we go with May,
Which I think is the proposed text that I had put in. I mean, feel free to.
yeah,
it.
and then can we drop the normally?
I mean, you can. I mean, the goal for the normally was just to make it clear that that was the normal case, and you're asking for a special exception, which is I thought what you wanted.
Yeah, but I here's the thing that I'm trying to avoid here, that I don't want everybody to think that they are a special whatever in this situation,
Okay.
right? Like, make it clear, like, can we keep the May, if we go with May, can we go with May and leave the flexibility ambiguous by keeping the May? Like dropping the line that David has added at the very end.
Okay.
And
If you delete the normally but keep the last text, sure. I mean, I think that has the same effect.
So you want to see the explicit part of it. You want to see the explicitness down here.
Right. In particular, not just that can be more than 7 days, but why? Under what would you have to argue to make the exception? Because I've done a lot of waiver processes, and whenever you have a waiver process, you want to explain what is the argument for why and what is the rationale for a waiver. Otherwise, you don't know what you're arguing for.
Yeah, but I don't want to argue. Like, I want to.
You're making them you're making them make the argument.
I know, but if you give them the out, then or you give it to them, like if you say this is the policy. Yes. And you don't explicitly state the out, then you don't have to argue with them about their out. Like, you give them, you put the May in there, and like we get the flexibility, but we don't want to have like, fix the vulnerability. Don't argue with me about it.
Let's assume that they can't fix it in 7 days, and there are no
fine. Then put out the remediation advice.
But I could fix it in 14 if you gave me 14.
It's gonna go public within 7, though.
That's the problem.
Okay.
That's the problem. Therefore, we need to fix the problem. Saying it must be in 7 days is the problem, not the solution. Again, my pitch.
So you're arguing.
So we are at the top of the hour.
I know.
So let's try to wrap this up.
Yeah.
So you could, again, we're agile and we're open source. You could alter the wording to be may, and then if there are substantial arguments, you could revise and pivot and alter.
Yeah,
of course.
I'm inclined to go with that. Leave the May in there that we have in there. Or change. It has been changed to be May, and add this in if we need it later.
Where is this May?
The May is public disclosure for an O-Day may be accelerated to within 7 days of the notice date.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. All right. Do it that way.
And like maybe drop the normally, and then drop.
Okay, sure.
Drop your.
Yeah, the normally was just intended to be clarification. I don't care that much about that.
And then drop this, or do you really want to keep this? I don't want to give people more opportunities to have arguments, right? Like,
but if you don't, then they're going. If you don't give people what's the point of the argument, they will come up with all sorts of reasons which may or may not be relevant. I mean, it's not a crisis if you don't include it. I think it's more important for that you have a may. Frankly, even a likely, but But if it's really a problem to include, I guess, sure. I mean, go ahead and remove, but then you're gonna have the problem of people will make all sorts of arguments that when you really don't have a time. Yeah, will likely be okay, even better.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I guess you've switched it anyway. So at that point, the text doesn't make as much sense. So yeah, go ahead and kill it.
All right. What about the what about I was rereading Google's policy and found this line here. And I want to run it by people real fast.
Okay.
Oop, I deleted something wrong here.
We believe that's important that the vendors disclose.
Like they can't not state that. Like they have like if we find evidence that it's being actively exploited, they can't get away with just saying yeah, whatever. Like,
And I will advise you again, Jonathan, let's assume positive intent that most developers take pride in their work.
Yeah.
And they want their software to be renowned and praiseworthy. And so they aren't necessarily trying to dodge out of something. They just might not have the training, the tools, the experience, or the resources.
no. I agree, but I think that it's important.
Not everybody's a weasel like me.
No, I have dealt with a lot of disclosure is fraught with peril. Yeah,
I've been doing this for a decade, man. I look forward to your plan coming into first contact with the enemy and seeing seeing what happens.
I have already been using Google's policy, right? And so it's basically this, but extra. So I have already faced the enemy and dealt with it. And that's why I'm fighting for the things that I'm fighting for. Because I'm like, I've used Google's policy, I've run into these problems. It's yeah.
Can I add that little parenthetical? Because
I mean, this is in the subsection defining.
I understand, but that sentence all by itself doesn't hint.
I mean, maybe just putting it somewhere else in the paragraph would help that.
No, I think it's in the right paragraph, right bullet.
No, it's in the right bullet. Is it in the right place in the paragraph? We move it closer to something else, and that we don't need to, then it's less ambiguous.
I don't think you do, because the earlier part's all about. Yeah, and if or you could make that its own bullet, frankly, because the other one is all talking about deadline times.
Well, this is that publication date can vary in the following ways.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. So yeah, this whole list is about varying the publication date.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So maybe this really does belong as its own.
It's not his own thing. It just maybe it needs to live earlier in the paragraph.
Yeah, or maybe just as frankly, its own paragraph right before the rationale. Because everything else is about the date. That's not really about the date. That's about the information in it.
I know. Google puts it in their list. It's a new line that I haven't seen before.
I mean, that's fine where it is. It's not it's not technically about the date, but it's certainly in the context about 0 days.
We believe that is important vendors. Oh, we're not calling them vendors, we're calling them maintainers.
Okay.
We believe it is important that maintainers disclose that there is evidence to suggest that the vulnerability is under actively exploitation.
And then that sentence is very clear on its own.
Yeah.
In fact, let me put a little
All right. right, folks, it is 7 after 7 p.m. here
Okay.
and 7 after other hours where you all are. I suggest we adjourn. We can continue this conversation in Slack and through any additional commentary. Looks like we're real close to getting this resolved.
Yeah.
Rob, did I answer your question here?
Yeah. And
you should have a communications plan if you feel this is going to be the policy for the foundation, because there are hundreds of people that participate, and you should make them aware. This is kind of the expectations.
Sorry, I don't wait. Haven't I done that by communicating to the TAC, or am I doing something else? What? I'm just confused. What are you saying
no,
here?
because there are many more. Most of the people who work on OpenSSF projects are not members of the TAC.
Yeah, very. There's a small handful, so we need to think about maybe talking with Jennifer, or we develop our own little comms plan. We could do, out to mailing lists. We can notify in Slack. There's a lot of different ways we can communicate, just so people are aware and understand what the expectations are.
Oh, okay.
And-
So we need to get it ratified by the TAC first. But like as soon as we get
Yeah.
it to the point where it's ratified by the TAC, we can, right?
And for example, I am an employee of Intel. Intel's disclosure policy may be different than yours. You'll need to understand how volunteers work through those conflicts. Am I beholden to the OpenSSF policy or my corporate policy?
Ooh, that's a whole other
That's a can of worms that I work for the Open Source Security Foundation, or I'm a representative of it. So this becomes my policy.
Right, but you are basically potentially putting volunteers and have a conflict of interest, or kind of a conflicting orders type scenario. So it's something you need to think about, and you put that as part of your comms plan.
I understand. Okay.
And maybe, frankly, a part of this disclosure policy. I don't know.
So this is okay. So again, I just to clarify, this is intent. I think this will end up being two separate documents. There'll be the bottom one, which will be like, this is a policy anybody can adopt. The top one is, we're adopting this policy, and those will be two separate things. One will reference the other.
I love it, by the way.
Perfect. Great.
The making stuff as general as you can, I think, is wonderful.
I was impressed by Mike Dolan's ability to just strip some words out and replace them with "we," and it became that. And I'm like, oh, that was easy. Yeah.
And I'm probably going to want to do something like that for some of these stuff. But quick FYI, I'm in the throes of trying to work out an LF-wide policy for incoming vulnerability reports, which will basically say, go follow the foundation/projects policies. So it doesn't replace the OpenSSFs. It basically makes it so that people are more likely to find it.
And
yes.
Luigi's doing the same thing, but we're trying to push out a security MD file for all OpenSSF projects. So it's related.
Yes.
Efforts.
I would so the one that disclose.io has, that I've linked to in the past, that one has been reviewed by lawyers and is used in places, and it's the one that I used as a basis for the one that I used at that I wrote at Gradle.
If it's disclosed.io, it was written by a lawyer. I know her.
Yeah, right.
Oh.
No. Yes. So, but I know that some of the language in there was very US centric. I don't know of anybody that has come up with an incoming disclosure policy that is global, but given that you have to waive permissions to a bunch of laws that are disparate. And so, like, what at a certain point people have started doing is just saying, we consider these actions to be permitted under whatever definition of your law is. Like, they call out CFAA because it's US based and they're a US based company. But then they go like they just say it's generally permitted against whatever laws your country is operating under.
There's a lot of opportunities working with vulnerability reporting across the globe. In some places, it's illegal. Reverse
Yes.
engineering is illegal. Other places, you must report to your federal entity.
China.
Also, I believe Germany
Yep.
and parts of like it was Norway or Scandinavia.
If
So
you are
the-
government, if you are a contractor for the U.S. government, you must report to the government and
Yeah.
absolutely not outside first.
Right. And so there's a lot of interesting nuances. I love the idea of trying to find some type of safe harbor language. That would be great because again, we're trying to have the free flow of communication and trying to get things fixed quickly. But we have to understand that everybody that finds something, there's potential restrictions. So we just need to be aware of that.
Okay, Jonathan, can you give me the URL for the Disclose.io and any other legal things? And I think basically you and I need to talk probably with Mike Dolan.
I put the link. There are links in response to Luigi's issue that
I'm not sure. Okay, I'm gonna have to hunt those down.
and there's also there's a disclosure policy builder that disclose.io, the website, has.
If you scroll down in the volume disclosure notes, just like search for Luigi. It was a couple calls back where he initially proposed it, and you can get the issue ID off that. Or you can go to our repo, and it probably is right towards the top.
Like 2 or 3 down, yeah. And I put some examples and the links in the GitHub repository just directly in case, even if you don't want to go through the generator.
Okay, I don't want to extend this call beyond. I'm not finding it on a quick search. So maybe you can give me a quick help, but we don't need to have this call longer for that. So
Yeah.
thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you. Great conversation. Appreciate it, Madison. I'll be talking to you soon.
Can I resolve your
pleasure?
Carl, can I resolve your comment on the document?
Sure.
Well,
I
take
am
care.
just here as a counselor to you, providing you advice. You can take my advice or ignore it.
Okay.
I have no emotional. I have a lot of scars all these years, and I'm just trying to help save you from some, and you can do with what I tell you.
I know. One final meeting discussing this document on Monday of next week.
Great.
Cool. Thank you all. Thank you for sticking around.